January 1st, 1976, 10:15 a.m. The National Archives at Kew, London. Amidst the scent of aging paper and floor wax, a secret that had slept for over 30 years was about to wake. Dr. Alfred Price, a former RAF officer turned meticulous historian, his reading glasses perched on his nose, carefully untied the faded pink ribbon on Air Ministry File Air 14 3470 seconds. His fingers, steady and practiced, lifted the cover. He couldn't have known that inside these brittle pages lay the story of Sergeant Roger Moreton, and a weapon so deceptively simple it had been completely overlooked by the enemy, a secret that would rewrite the history of the air war over Europe. You see, by late 1942, RAF Bomber Command was bleeding out in the skies over the Third Reich. The meticulously engineered German air defense system, a 1,000-kilometer-long chain of radar stations known as the Kammhuber Line, was lethally effective. Conceived by the brilliant General der Fliegernachrichtentruppe Wolfgang Martini, the Himmelbett system used Freya and Würzburg radars to guide dedicated night fighters onto lone bombers with chilling precision. The command's loss rates were climbing toward an unsustainable 5.5% per mission. A desperate Air Chief Marshal Sir Arthur Bomber Harris, a man known for his hardened pragmatism, famously declared he didn't care if a solution was made of string and sealing wax, so long as it saved his crews from being shot down night after night. The answer wasn't going to come from a team of decorated physicists, but from a drafty wooden outbuilding, Hut 7, at Malvern College on the evening of October 12, 1942. There, Sergeant Roger P.H.F. Moreton, a pre-war electrician and amateur radio enthusiast with the call sign G3BMS, was hunched over a Kosser Model 339 oscilloscope, the air thick with the smell of hot vacuum tubes and soldering flux. Moreton, service number 1,109,938, held no fancy degree. His genius was in his hands and his intuitive grasp of radio waves. His boss, Dr. Robert Cockburn, a Ph.D. physicist and head of the countermeasures group, wisely gave Moreton the freedom to tinker. While officially just a scientific assistant, grade 3, Moreton was about to devise a countermeasure using little more than a modified T1154 transmitter, the standard radio set found in every Avro Lancaster, and a spark of pure, unorthodox brilliance. His idea was almost laughably simple, born from an experiment that night. What if, instead of trying to create a complex electronic jamming signal, they just fought noise with more noise? Moreton took a simple Type 48 carbon granule microphone, the kind used for crew communications, and wired it directly to the modulator input of the powerful 75-watt T1154 transmitter. He then placed the microphone inside an engine nacelle, right next to the roaring heart of the bomber, the Rolls-Royce Merlin XX engine. The concept was audacious, to weaponize the very sound of the bomber stream itself. Before I tell you how Sergeant Roger Moreton and his small team at the Telecommunications Research Establishment managed to turn the deafening roar of a Merlin engine into a war-winning weapon that remained classified for over 30 years, comment here where you're watching from, and be sure to subscribe to the channel. Believe me, you won't want to miss the story of how a homemade radio jammer, codenamed Tinsel, managed to blind General Wolfgang Martini's entire German night fighter network by flooding their headphones with a symphony of chaos, a tactic governed by the secret protocol Umbra 7 that turned every single bomber into an instrument of electronic warfare. The brutal calculus of the air war was written in blood and fire across the night skies of late 1942. For the young men of RAF Bomber Command, huddled in their freezing aluminum skins, the odds were terrifyingly simple. Air Chief Marshal Sir Arthur Harris, a man whose jaws seemed permanently set against the grim arithmetic of attrition, knew that with a loss rate climbing to 5.5% on raids like the one against Frankfurt on December 2, 1942, his entire strategic bombing campaign was on the verge of collapse. Over 450 aircrew were being lost each week, and the cause was a ghost in the machine, a perfectly orchestrated German defense system. That ghost had a name, the Kammhuber Line. It was the masterwork of General der Fliegernachrichtentruppe Wolfgang Martini, a meticulous signals officer who, since July 1941, had woven a nearly impenetrable electronic net from Denmark to the Swiss border. This wasn't just a line. It was a 1,000-kilometer deep honeycomb of integrated air defense cells, each about 32 kilometers wide. Inside each cell, a Freya early warning radar, with its 125 MHz pulse, would detect the approaching bomber stream. Then, two precision Würzburg-Ries dish radars, operating between 560 and 580 MHz, would lock onto a single bomber and a dedicated German night fighter. A ground controller, sitting in a darkened bunker, would then talk his hunter onto the prey with chilling, calm instructions. The whole system, known as *Himmelbett, four-poster bed, was a symphony of destruction, and by November 1942, it was playing its deadliest tune yet, claiming over 200 Allied bombers since its full implementation. Imagine being a 21-year-old wireless operator, Flight Sergeant Thomas Evans, of No. 76 Squadron, on the night of January 15, 1943. You're 7 hours into a mission to Essen, the air inside your Halifax bomber thick with the smell of cordite, stale sweat, and the faint, sickly sweet odor of glycol from the heaters. The outside temperature is a bone-cracking -45 degrees Celsius. Your job is to listen, but through the crackle of your R1155 receiver, you hear him. A calm German voice speaking on the 3.8 MHz band, guiding a Messerschmitt Bf 110 G4, armed with four 20mm MG 151 cannons, directly towards your tail. There was nothing Evans or his pilot, Flying Officer Michael Shaw, could do but pray and weave, knowing that Martini's system had already marked them for death. In a semi-subterranean concrete bunker near Stade, Germany, on that very same night, Hauptmann Erich Reiter of the 2nd Night Fighter Division felt no emotion, only the cold satisfaction of a job well done. He watched two green blips converge on the glass screen of his Seeberg plotting table. One was Target 34B, a Halifax bomber flying at 19,000 feet. The other was Nachtjagdgeistwater, 3's ace, Oberleutnant Heinz Wolfgang Schnaufer. On the command frequency of 4.2 MHz, Reuter's voice was the only sound his pilot heard, a steady stream of vectors and altitudes. Vector 180 target is now 500 meters ahead. Engage. The process was clinical, repeatable, and devastatingly effective, a testament to the 25,000 personnel General Martini had trained to operate this vast network. Back in England, the pressure was mounting on Dr. Robert Cockburn. A sharp physicist with a 1934 Ph.D. from West Ham, he led the countermeasures group at the Telecommunications Research Establishment, now housed in the chilly requisitioned halls of Malvern College. By December 20, 1942, his desk was piled high with operational reports from No. 5 Group, each one a story of loss. The existing countermeasures were failing. Window, the strips of aluminum foil, now known as chaff, wasn't yet ready for mass deployment. The few specialized jamming aircraft, carrying the mandrel jammer to blind the Freya radars, were too scarce. Cockburn, a man who preferred quiet calculation, was being hammered by Harris's demands for a solution, any solution, that could be fitted to over 1,000 aircraft now. The air in Hut 7 was thick with the scent of ozone and desperation as his team worked 18-hour days. The weapon of the hour was the Avro Lancaster, a magnificent beast powered by four Rolls-Royce Merlin XX engines, each a 280-horsepower marvel of engineering. Over 300 would eventually be built, but its state-of-the-art R1155/T1154 radio set, while powerful with its 75-watt output, was a double-edged sword. It was the crew's lifeline, their connection to base on the 6.4 MHz band, but it also made them a predictable target. The Germans knew these frequencies. The Luftwaffe's own signals intelligence, the Horchdienst under the command of General Major Friedrich Vonert, had become adept at tracking and even spoofing RAF communications. The British needed to turn this strength into a weapon, but no one, from the top physicists at Cambridge to the engineers at Marconi, had yet figured out how. On the other side of the channel, confidence was absolute. General Martini, a man who wore his perfectly tailored Luftwaffe uniform with an engineer's pride, had briefed the High Command on October 5, 1942, assuring them that the Himmelbett system was impervious to any brute force jamming the British could muster. His intelligence suggested the British were focused on high-power, ground-based jammers, which were easily located and destroyed. He couldn't conceive of a scenario where every single one of the 500 bombers in a raid could become its own jamming platform. His entire defensive philosophy, built around clear high-frequency voice communications between 3 and 6 MHz, had no contingency for a sky filled with coordinated, overwhelming noise. The human cost of this electronic stalemate was staggering. Between October 1 and December 31, 1942, Bomber Command lost 512 aircraft over enemy territory. That's 584 highly trained aircrew killed, captured, or missing. Men like Sergeant Pilot Frank Ames and his navigator, Flying Officer David Bell, who had trained for 2 years, were lucky to survive 5 missions, the statistical chop point where a crewman's luck was considered to have run out. The psychological strain was immense, a constant thrum of anxiety that lived beneath the surface of the gallows humor in the mess halls of RAF Scampton and RAF Waddington. This desperation fueled the frantic innovation at Malvern. Dr. Cockburn's Division 6 wasn't a typical military research unit. It was a chaotic mix of PhD physicists like Dr. Martin Ryle and hands-on tinkerers like Sergeant Roger Moreton. Moreton, with his call sign G3BMS, was a pre-war radio ham who understood the feel of a circuit, the unique hum of an overloaded transformer, in a way a theoretician never could. While the academics drafted complex papers on magnetron theory for their H-2S radar, Moreton was in Hut 7 on November 10, 1942, with a soldering iron and a scavenged Type 48 carbon microphone, exploring the very nature of noise itself, a pursuit most of his superiors considered a scientific dead end. The Germans, meanwhile, were refining their killing machine. The Messerschmitt Bf 110 G4, the primary night fighter of late 1942, was being fitted with its own airborne interception radar, the FUG 202 Liechtenstein BC, a set of distinctive mattress antennas on its nose. This allowed aces like Major Helmut Lent of Nachtjagdgeschwader 1 to find targets even if the ground controller's instructions were momentarily unclear. This tactical evolution, which came into widespread service in early 1943, meant that any British countermeasure had to do more than just disrupt GCI. It had to create total chaos across the entire German command and control frequency spectrum. The strategic imperative was the upcoming Battle of the Ruhr, scheduled to begin in March 1943. Harris planned to flatten the industrial heartland of the Third Reich with a sustained, 5-month-long campaign involving over 18,000 individual sorties. Planners like Air Vice Marshal Sir Robert Sonby, Harris's senior air staff officer, knew the offensive would fail and cost thousands of lives if the Kammhuber Line wasn't neutralized. On January 2, 1943, Sonby signed a memorandum stating that without a, quote, radical new form of radio countermeasure, projected losses for the campaign would exceed a catastrophic 7%. The clock was ticking, not just for the war effort, but for the 125,000 men of Bomber Command. Previous attempts at electronic warfare had been piecemeal. A system called Moonshine, deployed in mid-1942, involved a small number of specialized aircraft carrying transmitters that re-radiated German Freya radar signals to create ghost formations of bombers, But the Luftwaffe quickly adapted. Another, Mandrel, was a noise jammer that screened the bomber stream, but it required dedicated aircraft from No. 100 Group, and there simply weren't enough of them. Only about 16 operational aircraft by February 1943. What was needed was something universal, something that could be fitted into every single one of the 700 Lancasters and Halifaxes that would form the main force. This was the environment of extreme duress in which Roger Moreton worked. He wasn't an officer or a celebrated scientist. He was service number 1,109,938. A man who wore a rumpled RAF uniform and whose fingernails were perpetually stained with grease and flux. His genius wasn't theoretical, it was tactile. He understood that the 27-liter Rolls-Royce Merlin engine wasn't just a power source. It was a noise generator of immense power and complexity. On the evening of October 12, 1942, while his colleagues were wrestling with complex wave equations, Moreton connected a simple microphone to a transmitter, driven by a hunch that even General Martini, with all his resources, had overlooked. The simplest sounds could be the most powerful weapons. The German system's greatest strength was its rigid, centralized control. Every fighter in a Himmelbett box was an extension of the will of a single ground controller. Men like Lieutenant Peter Spoden of NJG-5 were trained for 18 months to follow these voice commands without question. This discipline made them incredibly lethal in a clean radio environment. But it was also a critical vulnerability. If you could sever that link, if you could blind the controller and deafen the pilot simultaneously across 20 different frequencies, the entire structure would collapse into a confused, ineffective swarm. The Germans had built a fortress of logic and order, and so the stage was set for a confrontation fought not with bullets, but with radio waves. On one side, the vast, technologically sophisticated German air defense network, the pride of General Wolfgang Martini and the product of 3 years of meticulous engineering. On the other, the desperate ingenuity of Dr. Robert Cockburn's team at Malvern and the unorthodox mind of a single NCO, Sergeant Roger Moreton. The fate of thousands of airmen and the success of the entire Allied bombing strategy hinged on a secret that was about to be born in the roar of a Merlin engine, a secret weapon made not in a factory, but jury-rigged in a wooden hut. The breakthrough came late on the night of October 12, 1942. In the drafty confines of Hut 7, the air thick with the scent of ozone and hot bakelite, Sergeant Roger Moreton leaned closer to his Kosser Model 339 oscilloscope. At exactly 11:30 p.m., he watched the jagged green line dance wildly. It was the raw, unfiltered audio from a Merlin XX engine, broadcast from a modified T1154 transmitter across the room. Dr. Robert Cockburn, summoned by Moreton's excitement, stood silhouetted in the doorway, his pipe clenched in his teeth, witnessing the birth of a weapon made of pure, weaponized noise. Dr. Cockburn, a man whose mind moved with the speed of a slide rule, immediately grasped the immense potential. On the morning of October 15, 1942, he pulled in Dr. Martin Ryle, a brilliant but notoriously prickly Cambridge physicist, to provide the theoretical backbone for what Moreton had stumbled upon. Cockburn secured an initial discretionary budget of just £500 from the Air Ministry to develop a prototype, arguing it was a low-cost audio modulation experiment. To ensure absolute secrecy, he christened the project with a deliberately frivolous code name, Tinsel. The name was meant to evoke images of Christmas decorations, a perfect piece of bureaucratic camouflage designed by Cockburn to deflect any unwanted attention from the 12-person team now working in the hum of Hut 7, the air perpetually smelling of his strong pipe tobacco. The first field prototype was a testament to Moreton's hands-on genius. On October 28, 1942, at the windswept airfield of RAF Defford, Moreton himself, his fingernails black with grease, installed his creation into a Vickers Wellington bomber serial R1516. He had encased a standard Type 48 carbon microphone in a custom-molded rubber baffle to reduce wind distortion and wired it with 12 feet of shielded cable directly to the modulator input of the aircraft's T1154 transmitter. The test pilot, Flight Lieutenant John Dane, was instructed to run the port inboard Merlin XX engine at precisely 650 RPM. On the ground, Dr. Cockburn and a deeply skeptical Group Captain Jeffrey Tuttle huddled over a captured German Telefunken E381 receiver tuned to the GCI frequency of 4.2 MHz. When Moreton gave the signal, the receiver didn't just crackle. It exploded with a physical wall of sound, a deafening, rhythmic roar that was so powerful it made the metal trailer vibrate. It wasn't just jamming, it was auditory violence. Moreton, watching the perfect, chaotic waveform on his portable oscilloscope, allowed himself a rare, thin smile. The security lockdown was instantaneous and absolute. On November 1, 1942, acting on Cockburn's urgent recommendation, Air Vice Marshal Sir Robert Sonby personally signed Protocol Umbra 7, classifying Tinsel at a level higher than most radar projects. The protocol stipulated that only 2 crew members, the wireless operator and the aircraft's captain, were to be briefed on its true function. To the other 5 crew members, and all ground staff, the microphone in the engine nacelle was officially documented as a Type 14 vibration sensor, a clever ruse invented by Dr. Cockburn to monitor engine performance. The next hurdle was turning this brilliant hack into a weapon for over 1,000 bombers. By November 15, 1942, Dr. Cockburn had secured a contract with Pi Limited of Cambridge for 2,000 complete modification kits at a cost of £12.500. Each kit was deceptively simple: 1 Type 48 microphone, 15 feet of shielded cable, a toggle switch labeled Special, and a 3-page installation manual written by Moreton. Training the operators was an even more delicate matter. Top wireless operators, like Flight Sergeant James Croft of No. 50 Squadron, were covertly sent to RAF Timpsford for an advanced communications course. Inside a locked Nissen hut, smelling of damp wood and chalk dust, Moreton himself, using diagrams he drew on a portable blackboard, taught these 200 men how to become electronic hunters. The first live operational trial took place during a 277 aircraft raid on Duisburg on the night of December 20, 1942. A special flight of 12 Avro Lancasters from No. 97 Squadron, led by Wing Commander Hamish Mahadi, were the first to carry Tinsel into combat. From a listening post at RAF Kingsdown, Dr. Robert Cockburn monitored the German night fighter frequencies. At 22:47 hours, as the bombers crossed into the *Himmelbett* box controlled by Hauptmann Klaus Richter of the 3rd Night Fighter Division, the operators struck. Richter's calm, precise instructions on 4.1 MHz were suddenly consumed by a howling hurricane of Merlin engine noise. Over the next 15 minutes, the 12 Lancasters systematically silenced 8 different GCI frequencies. The German radio net collapsed into chaos, with panicked pilots shouting over the noise. All 12 of the Tinsel-equipped Lancasters returned home without a scratch, an impossible result on a night where the main force suffered a 4.8% loss rate. The results were irrefutable. Air Chief Marshal Sir Arthur Harris reviewed Cockburn's 2-page report on December 22, 1942. The report included verbatim transcripts of the German radio bedlam and the stunning 0% loss rate for the trial flight. Harris, a man known for his gruff impatience, took the briar pipe from his mouth, picked up a thick red pen, and scrawled 2 words across the top of the page: "Proceed, maximum priority." The order was implicit. Dr. Cockburn and Sergeant Moreton had just been told to equip the entire bomber force, and they had less than 10 weeks to do it before the Battle of the Ruhr. The mass rollout, codenamed Operation Tinsmith, was a logistical miracle performed in the brutal English winter of early 1943. From January 10th to February 28th, over 500 ground crew, working in freezing hangars at 25 different airbases, fitted the kits to over 800 Lancaster and Halifax bombers. They had no idea what they were installing, believing the official story about engine vibration sensors. Sergeant Roger Moreton, now with the temporary rank of warrant officer, became a phantom, traveling between bases like RAF Elsham Wolds and RAF Scampton in a rattling Austin Tilly, his greatcoat perpetually smelling of damp wool and aviation fuel, to personally oversee the installations and conduct the secret briefings with the wireless operators. By March 1, 1943, just 4 days before the opening salvo of the Battle of the Ruhr, an astonishing 950 heavy bombers were Tinsel equipped and their operators trained. The entire program, from Moreton's late-night discovery to full operational readiness, had cost the Air Ministry less than £25,000, the price of replacing just 2 downed Lancasters. The secret was perfectly kept. The Luftwaffe's Signals Intelligence Service, the Horchdienst under the command of General Major Friedrich Vonert, had detected nothing. They were looking for a sledgehammer, and they were about to be undone by 950 scalpels. The true genius of the secret, masterfully guided by Dr. Robert Cockburn, lay in its elegant, layered deception. Sergeant Roger Moreton's invention wasn't a complex black box that could be captured and reverse-engineered. It was a technique, a concept, built from the most mundane components. A standard-issue Type 48 microphone, costing less than £2, some shielded cable, and the T1154 transmitter, already sitting in every bomber. The security was not in armed guards, but in the brilliant bureaucratic lie of the vibration sensor and the ironclad secrecy of Protocol UMBRA-7. As the first wave of 369 Lancasters prepared to take off for Essen on the night of March 5, 1943, the air on the bomber fields thick with the scent of wet grass and high-octane fuel, the weapon was not just the hardware. It was the classified knowledge locked inside the minds of hundreds of wireless operators, each one now an agent of electronic chaos, ready to conduct a symphony of noise, orchestrated by one quiet electrician. On the night of March 5, 1943, the opening act of the Battle of the Ruhr, Hauptmann Klaus Richter, sat hunched in his subterranean GCI bunker near Krefeld, the air stale with the scent of recycled air and lukewarm coffee. At exactly 22:47 hours, as he guided 2 Messerschmitt Bf-110s onto a Lancaster bomber using the 4.1 MHz frequency, his Telefunken E381 receiver suddenly erupted. It wasn't static. It was a physical, overwhelming roar, a rhythmic, mechanical howl that completely obliterated the calm voice of his pilot, Oberleutnant Franz Wegmann. Richter slammed the side of his receiver, but the noise was relentless. He could only log it as, quote, severe atmospheric disturbance, the first of thousands of such mistaken entries. In the vibrating fuselage of an Avro Lancaster from No. 50 Squadron, thousands of feet above Richter's bunker, Flight Sergeant James Jimmy Croft felt a grim satisfaction. A 22-year-old former post office clerk from Manchester, Jimmy was meticulous, his worn leather gloves moving with practiced ease over the dials of his R1155 receiver. He had hunted for Richter's frequency for 7 minutes, a faint German voice in the ether. Finding it, he didn't hesitate. At 22:47 hours, he flipped the small, unlabeled toggle switch, the special switch, and listened for a half-second to the deafening roar of his own port-inboard Merlin XX engine in his headphones, before patching it directly into the T1154 transmitter. For the next 90 seconds, he and 11 other operators in his section owned that frequency, painting a 20-mile-wide swath of auditory chaos across the German control grid. The after-action reports that landed on the desk of General Wolfgang Martini on March 7, 1943, were a study in confusion. From his headquarters in Berlin-Wannsee, Martini, a man who detested ambiguity, read dozens of accounts of unprecedented radio failure and hellish static from over 40 different GCI frequencies during the Essen raid. He conferred with General Major Friedrich Vonert of the Horchdienst *, whose initial analysis concluded the phenomena were likely a combination of, quote, severe ionospheric disturbance and, quote, massed British transmitter interference, a critical misinterpretation. Vonert's team, equipped with sophisticated direction-finding gear, was searching for a few powerful ground-based jammers, not 300 individual mobile sources of low-tech noise. Martini, who had personally guaranteed the integrity of his Himmelbett network to Göring just 2 months prior, found the explanation wholly unsatisfying, the scent of his smoldering cigar filling the tense silence of his office. The chaos was felt most acutely in the air. Oberleutnant Peter Spoden, an ace with 12 kills flying a Bf 110 G4 for Nachtjagdgeschwader 5 was just 200 meters from a Halifax bomber, serial number LW285, when his controller's voice vanished from his headphones, replaced by what he later described as the sound of a factory exploding. His Fuji 202 Liechtenstein radar was still functioning, but without the final GCI vectors, the intercept was clumsy. Spoden, who hadn't missed a GCI-guided kill in over 50 missions, watched in fury as the bomber slipped away into the clouds. He was flying deaf. His greatest weapon, the calm, precise voice of his ground controller, had been stolen from him. The operators weren't just making noise, they were conducting a symphony. As outlined in the top-secret Protocol Umbra 7, the wireless operators of a squadron worked as a coordinated hunting pack. One operator, designated the Ferret, would locate a primary GCI frequency. A second, the confirmer, would tune to the same frequency. On a prearranged time signal, broadcast over their internal VHF channel, up to 12 operators would simultaneously engage Tinsel on that single frequency for a precise 90-second burst. This Tinsel barrage, an invention of Dr. Robert Cockburn himself, was designed to create an inescapable wall of sound, ensuring the German controller couldn't simply switch to a nearby channel. The German response was to search for a needle in a haystack, while the haystack itself was the weapon. General Martini ordered his signals intelligence units to triangulate the source of the jamming. On the night of a 653-bomber raid on Hamburg on March 28, 1943, Horchdienst listening posts from Stade to Bremen were overwhelmed. Their equipment, calibrated to find a single powerful transmitter, went haywire trying to get a fix on what turned out to be over 400 separate, mobile sources of noise spread across 2,000 square miles of sky. Major Helmut Lent, one of the Luftwaffe's most decorated aces with over 50 kills, reported his radio was completely useless for 45 minutes straight. His complaint was logged by Martini's staff as a probable equipment malfunction, a sign of their deepening inability to grasp the scale of the attack. The weight of this secret was carried in the quiet rituals of men like Jimmy Croft. Back on the ground at RAF Scampton, the air thick, with the smell of damp earth and aviation fuel, he would meticulously clean his radio set, polishing the bakelite knobs of the R1155 with a soft cloth. He never spoke of the special switch or the German voices he hunted, not even to his closest friend, the crew's navigator, Flying Officer Alan Davies. The official story of the vibration sensor was a wall of silence he maintained perfectly. He was a 22-year-old from Manchester, a young man who had wanted to fix radios for the post office, now holding the power to blind an entire army, and he couldn't tell a soul. Brilliantly, the British gave the Germans a more obvious target to chase. The Horchdienst under the direction of its chief analyst Dr. Ernst Fickler, soon detected the powerful signals of Cigar, a dedicated jammer carried by a small number of specialized Lancasters from No. 101 Squadron. This was the perfect red herring. While Fickler's best mind spent weeks trying to analyze the complex waveform of the cigar transmissions, they dismissed the far more widespread engine noise as a secondary, less significant phenomenon, mere background clutter. Dr. Robert Cockburn had predicted this, noting in a memo dated April 2, 1943, that the crude must be used to camouflage the refined. The Germans were focusing all their attention on the sledgehammer, completely missing the 900 scalpels cutting them apart. The practical result of this ignorance was catastrophic for the Luftwaffe. During a major raid on Dortmund on the night of May 4, 1943, the GCI controller for the heavily defended Köln sector, Hauptmann Erich Reiter, had a perfect picture of the incoming bomber stream on his Seeberg plotting table. He had 15 battle-ready Bf-110s circling, waiting for his command. At 1:15 a.m., just as he began issuing vectors on the primary command frequency of 3.9 MHz, the Tinsel barrage hit. For 18 solid minutes, his entire command net was a howling storm of noise. In that critical window, the main force of 412 Lancasters passed through his sector. Luftwaffe records for that night show Reiter's cell, normally one of the deadliest on the Kammhuber Line, claimed 0 kills, down from its nightly average of 7. His official report blamed a catastrophic and inexplicable failure of all primary and secondary radio equipment. The secret should have been blown wide open on May 12, 1943. Lancaster ED 888 of No. 9 Squadron was hit by flak and crashed near Bochum. Within hours, a German technical intelligence team, led by a meticulous signals officer named *Sonderführer Klaus von Below, was crawling over the wreckage. They found the T1154 transmitter. They found the R1155 receiver. They even found the charred Type 48 microphone still attached to its mounting in the scorched Merlin engine nacelle. The entire system was physically in their hands. The subsequent report filed by von Below's team on May 20, 1943, is a monument to the success of Dr. Cockburn's deception. They correctly identified the microphone, but concluded, exactly as the cover story intended, that it was an experimental vibration sensor for monitoring engine stress. They noted the unusual wiring to the transmitter's modulator, but dismissed it as a non-standard field modification by the crew, likely for an improved intercom system. They completely missed the significance of the simple, unmarked toggle switch on the wireless operator's panel. The secret had been captured, examined, and officially declared harmless. By June 1943, the consistent failure of the night fighter force was causing a crisis at the highest levels of the Reich. The Battle of the Ruhr was crippling German war production. In a furious conference at the Reich Air Ministry on June 22, 1943, a red-faced Hermann Göring slammed his fist on a large oak table and screamed at General Martini and General Josef Kammhuber, demanding to know why their invincible defense line had collapsed. Martini, a proud engineer reduced to stammering, could only present charts showing unprecedented levels of atmospheric interference on every major raid for the past 3 months. It was a humiliating, technically bankrupt explanation that convinced no one. The air in the Grand Office was thick, with the smell of Göring's cigar smoke and Martini's utter failure. The men in the bombers didn't know the reason, but they felt the result. A palpable shift occurred in the mess halls and briefing rooms of Bomber Command. The odds, once terrifyingly short, seemed to be lengthening. Loss rates directly attributable to GCI vectored night fighters, which had peaked at a terrifying 4.1% in January 1943, had fallen to just 2.2% by June. Men like Flying Officer Michael Shaw, a pilot who had narrowly survived a fighter attack over Essen months earlier, noticed the German voices on the R/T were less frequent, often frantic and confused. An unspoken, fragile hope began to spread through the squadrons. Maybe, just maybe, you could actually survive your tour of 30 operations. This stark contrast in knowledge was the secret's true power. While General Martini was blindly trying to solve an atmospheric mystery, Dr. Robert Cockburn's team at Malvern was receiving precise, quantitative data on Tinsel's success. At a special listening post at RAF Kingsdown, German-speaking members of the Women's Auxiliary Air Force, WAAF, monitored the GCI frequencies every night. They logged every panicked German transmission and timed how long each frequency was successfully denied by the Tinsel barrages. Cross-referencing this with ultra-intercepts from Bletchley Park, Cockburn's report of July 1, 1943, proved with mathematical certainty that Tinsel was disrupting over 60% of all German GCI communications during the most critical 40-minute phase of a raid. In a final, desperate move that perfectly symbolized their ignorance, General Martini ordered a massive disruptive shift in late July 1943. Believing they were fighting a sophisticated, frequency-specific British jamming system, he commanded the entire night fighter force to abandon their tested high-frequency bands and move to new, higher VHF frequencies. They were re-engineering their whole air defense network to fight a phantom. They never knew they weren't being beaten by a black box or a wonder weapon. They were being deafened by the raw, weaponized roar of thousands of Rolls-Royce Merlin engines, a crude and brilliant symphony of noise conducted by hundreds of anonymous wireless operators, each one a disciple of Sergeant Roger Moreton's simple, devastating idea. The end of the Battle of the Ruhr in July 1943 wasn't just a victory, it was a vindication. The numbers landing on Air Chief Marshal Sir Arthur Harris's desk were undeniable. Bomber Command's overall loss rate had dropped from a catastrophic 5.5% to a sustainable 3.2%. Dr. Robert Cockburn's preliminary report, dated July 28, 1943, estimated that Tinsel had directly prevented the interception of at least 250 bombers, saving the lives of over 750 trained airmen. The secret, born in Hut 7, had proven its worth in the fiery skies over Essen and Dortmund, a silent guardian made of noise. But the weapon couldn't stand still. Sergeant Roger Moreton, now a warrant officer whose rumpled uniform seemed a permanent fixture in Hut 7, knew the Germans would adapt. By August 10, 1943, he and his small team had developed, quote, Tinsel 2. The upgrade was deceptively simple. Instead of one microphone, it used two, one in each inboard Merlin XX engine nacelle. These were wired to a new junction box, the Type 37 modulator, which allowed the wireless operator to select either engine sound or, in a stroke of genius, blend both into a truly hellish, phase-shifting roar. This new version was first trialed by the specialized Lancasters of No. 101 Squadron during a raid on Nuremberg. On the ground, General Wolfgang Martini's replacement, the beleaguered General Josef Kammhuber, was already wasting precious resources, diverting over 250 of his best pilots to the less effective wild saw freelance tactics, a direct consequence of Tinsel's continued, baffling success. The air in Moreton's workshop was thick, with the smell of hot solder and the quiet hum of progress. With success came the need for even tighter security. The number of briefed personnel had grown from a few hundred to over 500 by September 1943, a dangerous expansion of the circle of trust. On September 1st, Air Vice Marshal Sir Robert Sonby issued, quote, Protocol Umbra 7B, a stark, one-page addendum. It made any unauthorized discussion of the vibration sensor an offense punishable by immediate court-martial. The psychological weight of this secret was immense. When Flight Sergeant Alan Rigby of No. 617 Squadron was shot down over the Zuiderzee on September 16th, he was captured and interrogated for 3 weeks by the Gestapo. He never broke, never gave them the one clue they needed, protecting a secret that was now saving an average of 45 bombers and 315 men every month. The devastating synergy of British countermeasures was unleashed during Operation Gomorrah, the firebombing of Hamburg in late July 1943. This was the first time Tinsel was deployed in concert with Window, the code name for clouds of aluminum strips dropped to blind German radar, The effect was total paralysis. While the Würzburg radars were blinded by chaff, the Tinsel barrages obliterated the GCI voice channels the controllers desperately tried to use as a backup. On the night of July 28, General Martini's own war diary noted that the entire Hamburg defense sector was functionally deaf and blind for 47 consecutive minutes. The German night fighter force was left circling helplessly, a pack of wolves that could neither see nor hear their prey. The numbers from Gomorrah were staggering, and they landed on Dr. Robert Cockburn's desk on August 5, 1943, as he sat in his Malvern office, the scent of summer rain mixing with his ever-present pipe tobacco. Bomber Command had flown 3 095 sorties over 7 nights and lost only 87 aircraft, a loss rate of just 2.8%, unheard of for a target so heavily defended. Post-war analysis by historians like Dr. Alfred Price would conclude that without Tinsel's auditory chaos protecting the predictable window corridors, losses would have likely jumped by at least 150 aircraft. Dr. Cockburn, a man of quiet calculation, noted in the margin of his report that Sergeant Morton's initial £12,500 investment had now saved the RAF over £7.5 million in Lancaster bombers alone, a cost-benefit ratio of over 600 to 1. The Germans, utterly baffled, began chasing ghosts. By October 1943, their top signals intelligence analysts, led by Dr. Ernst Fickler, had concluded that the voice channel interference wasn't coming from the bombers themselves. They theorized it was a powerful new ground-based system, which the British codenamed Corona. Corona was real. It involved German-speaking WAAFs broadcasting fake instructions from England, but it was a sideshow, a piece of psychological warfare. Dr. Cockburn masterfully used Corona as a red herring, allowing the Germans to focus their efforts on finding a single, powerful transmitter while remaining completely ignorant of the 900 individual Tinsel units shredding their communications every night. General Kammhuber was re-engineering his entire network to fight a phantom. The ultimate test came with the Battle of Berlin, Harris's grim winter offensive that began on November 18, 1943. This was to be the knockout blow. Tinsel was no longer an experiment. It was a core tactical doctrine, standard equipment on all 900 bombers of the main force. The wireless operators, men like the now veteran warrant officer Jimmy Croft, were no longer passive listeners. They were combatants in the ether, their R1155 receivers, their weapons, the roar of their own Merlin engines their ammunition. The fate of the big city, and thousands of aircrew, rested on their ability to win this invisible war, night after freezing night. Inside his Lancaster from No. 50 Squadron on December 2, 1943, the air so cold at 20,000 feet that his breath froze on his oxygen mask, Jimmy Croft felt the familiar thud of flak hitting the fuselage. For 35 minutes over the target, he was a hunter. He and the 11 other operators in his squadron section executed 15 perfectly timed Tinsel barrages, jumping from 3.8 MHz to 4.5 MHz, silencing each German GCI frequency for precisely 90 seconds. He later described the visceral satisfaction of hearing a calm, confident German controller's voice suddenly swallowed by the raw power of his own port-inboard Merlin, a sound he called the noise of not dying tonight. WWII service intercepts later confirmed Croft's actions had directly thwarted 2 GCI-guided attacks on his section, saving at least 14 men. By the spring of 1944, the cumulative impact had shattered the once feared German night fighter force. Their morale was collapsing. Aces like Major Heinz Wolfgang Schnaufer now had to rely almost exclusively on their new, temperamental FUG-220 Liechtenstein SN-2 airborne radar, hunting visually in a sky full of danger. The rigid, lethal efficiency of the *Himmelbett* system was a memory, even during the disastrous Nuremberg raid of March 30, 1944, where Bomber Command lost 95 aircraft. Tinsel hadn't failed. WWII service transcripts showed it had successfully jammed over 78% of GCI channels. The catastrophic losses that night were due to an unexpectedly clear sky and a bright moon, which allowed German pilots to spot the bomber stream from miles away, a bitter lesson that technology couldn't control the weather. Tinsel's success fundamentally changed the nature of the air war, paving the way for the creation of the dedicated No. 100 Bomber Support Group, an entire force dedicated to electronic warfare. Yet, the original system, now officially designated, quote, Special Equipment 14A in supply manifests, remained a standard fitting in every single Lancaster and Halifax. Until the final bombs fell on May 8, 1945, the weaponized roar of the Merlin engine, a secret born from the simple insight of Sergeant Roger Moreton, continued to shield the bomber streams. It was a ghost in the machine that the enemy never saw, a symphony of chaos that saved thousands of lives and remained a perfectly kept secret to the very end. January 1, 1976, 10:15 a.m., the National Archives at Kew, London. The silence was broken only by the soft rustle of aging paper. Dr. Alfred Price, a meticulous historian and former RAF navigator, his reading glasses perched low on his nose, carefully untied the faded pink ribbon on Air Ministry File Air 14 3470 seconds. Inside, he found not complex schematics, but a series of crudely drawn circuit diagrams initialed, quote, 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 quote. The documents described a low-cost audio denial method, codenamed Tinsel. He could feel the weight of 31 years of secrecy lift, as he realized he was looking at the answer to a question that had haunted historians for decades. The brittle pages revealed a secret of almost insulting simplicity. Dr. Price, his heart pounding a steady rhythm against his ribs, reads Sergeant Roger Moreton's handwritten memos from October 1942. They detailed how to wire a standard Type 48 carbon microphone directly to the modulator input of a T1154 transmitter, turning the raw 130 decibel roar of a Merlin XX engine into a jamming signal. For years, historians like Professor Sir Michael Howard had been baffled by the sudden collapse of German night fighter GCI effectiveness in early 1943. Here, in a dusty file that smelled faintly of vanilla and decay, was the reason: a weapon made not of advanced physics, but of weaponized noise. This revelation was only possible because of the UK's 30-year rule, which had finally forced the declassification of these specific 1943 to 1945 files. For 31 years, the full operational details of RAF Bomber Command's electronic countermeasures had remained under lock and key, a secret so complete that even the official war histories written by Sir Charles Webster contained only vague references. Dr. Price, a man who had flown 47 missions and understood the terror of a GCI vectored attack, immediately grasped the scale of what he'd found. He sat for nearly 2 hours in the quiet, climate-controlled reading room, the low hum of the ventilation system, a stark contrast to the roar described in the files, cross-referencing Moreton's memos with operational reports from the March 5, 1943 raid on Essen, and saw the numbers align perfectly. Tinsel was deployed, and GCI vectored kills dropped by over 50% in a single night. The paper trail was only half the story. Dr. Price knew he needed the human element. His research led him, on April 12, 1978, to the modest Manchester home of a 55-year-old retired postmaster named James "Jimmy" Croft. Croft, a former flight lieutenant and wireless operator with No. 50 Squadron, finally broke his 3-decade silence. In his small living room, the air thick with the scent of his pipe tobacco, Croft described the secret briefings at RAF Tempsford, and the small, unmarked, special toggle switch that fed the bloody awful racket of the Merlin engine directly into his transmitter, a sound that meant life or death. Croft's testimony was the Rosetta Stone that unlocked the files. He provided the operational context that the dry technical memos in file Air 14 3470 seconds lacked, describing the Tinsel barrage tactic where up to 12 operators in a squadron section would coordinate to obliterate a single German GCI frequency, like 4.2 MHz, for a precise 90-second burst. He confirmed the, quote, vibration sensor cover story, a piece of bureaucratic genius from Dr. Robert Cockburn, and spoke of the quiet, unassuming warrant officer named Moreton, who had taught them how to hunt German voices in the dark. For historians like Martin Middlebrook, this first-hand account was the final, irrefutable proof of a secret war fought entirely in the electromagnetic spectrum. The publication of Dr. Alfred Price's findings, first in a 1978 article for the Royal United Services Institute Journal, and then in his 1979 book, Kampfhörer Instruments of Darkness, sent shockwaves through the historical community. German veterans, including the legendary ace General Adolf Galland, had long attributed their communication failures to the more obvious window chaff and command errors. They were stunned to learn that the primary culprit was a crude audio jammer they had never even identified. The revelation explained why German technical intelligence teams, like the one led by Sonderführer Klaus von Below, that examined the wreckage of at least 5 Tinsel-equipped Lancasters, had found the microphone but dismissed it as a non-standard intercom modification. The secret had been hiding in plain sight. Suddenly, the forgotten innovator had a name. With the secret now public, Dr. Price and researchers at the RAF Historical Society pieced together the life of Sergeant Roger, P.H.H.F. Moreton, service number 1,109,938. They discovered he was a humble, self-taught electrician and radio ham from Kent, callsign G3BMS, who had quietly passed away in 1971. He had received no public honors, no medals, no official recognition for a contribution that had saved thousands of lives. His legacy was just a set of initials, RM, scribbled on a handful of memos in a file that had been sealed for over 30 years. The historical reevaluation was profound. A new study commissioned in 1982 by the Air Historical Branch, directly citing Dr. Price's work, concluded that Tinsel's disruption of over 60% of GCI traffic during the critical Battle of the Ruhr had directly prevented the interception of at least 300 heavy bombers. This meant the simple, low-cost system devised by Sergeant Roger Moreton and championed by Dr. Robert Cockburn had saved the lives of over 100 highly trained airmen. The initial investment of less than £25,000 had yielded a return that was strategically priceless, a fact completely absent from the official narrative of the war. This new knowledge explained tactical mysteries that had vexed historians for a generation. The inexplicable collapse of the rigid Himmelbett system in mid-1943 and General Joseph Kammhuber's desperate shift to the less effective Wild Tsar freelance tactics finally made sense. They weren't fighting a sophisticated electronic weapon, they were being deafened by a storm of noise they couldn't comprehend. The frantic German radio chatter logged by the WWII service and the German-speaking WAAFs at RAF Kingsdown wasn't just static. It was the sound of an entire air defense network being systematically dismantled by hundreds of anonymous wireless operators, each conducting their own small part in a symphony of chaos. The truth, in the end, didn't emerge from a battlefield confession or a dramatic revelation. It was found in the quiet, dusty stacks of a government archive by one persistent historian. On that cold January morning, Dr. Alfred Price didn't just declassify a file. He rewrote the history of the air war. He restored the legacy of a forgotten genius, Sergeant Roger Moreton, and gave voice to the thousands of wireless operators who had fought and won a secret, invisible war with the only weapon they had, the deafening, life-saving roar of their own engines. The wake of Dr. Alfred Price's 1979 book, Instruments of Darkness, was not a tidal wave, but a slow, powerful tide of historical revision. By June 1982, the Air Historical Branch under the direction of its chief historian, Dr. John Tanner, issued a formal addendum to the official war records. It cited the newly declassified file AIR 14 seconds and credited Special Equipment 14A, or Tinsel, with directly saving an estimated 100 aircrew lives during the 1943-1944 bomber offensive. The report calculated the program's cost-benefit ratio at an astonishing 800 to 1, factoring in the £15 million worth of Lancaster bombers saved. The quiet work of Dr. Robert Cockburn was finally placed in its proper context, but it was the name of Sergeant Roger Moreton, the humble radio ham with the call sign G3BMS, that was finally elevated from a set of initials in a dusty file to his rightful place as one of the war's most effective and most overlooked innovators. The scent of old paper in the Q archives had finally given way to the crisp smell of new ink in the history books. This formal recognition led to a quiet, deeply personal ceremony on October 12, 1984, the 42nd anniversary of Moreton's breakthrough. At Malvern College, on the very spot where the drafty Hut 7 once stood, a simple bronze plaque was unveiled by Air Chief Marshal Sir Michael Beetham. Roger Moreton's surviving sister, Eleanor Moreton, accepted a posthumous mention in dispatches on his behalf. The citation, read to the small crowd of veterans and historians, praised his unorthodox genius and decisive contribution to the electronic war. There was no grand parade, only the rustle of autumn leaves and the quiet dignity of a secret finally honored. The legacy of Tinsel, however, echoed far beyond memorials. Its core principle, using simple, overwhelming noise to achieve communications denial, became a foundational doctrine in modern electronic warfare. Experts at the NATO Air Armaments Group, like Dr. David L. Adamy, would later point to Tinsel as the conceptual ancestor of modern communications jamming (COMJAM) systems. The idea of a distributed platform-level jammer, where every aircraft is a node in the electronic attack, is seen today in the networked capabilities of the American EA-18G Growler, whose AN/ALQ-99 jamming pods perform a function over 5,000 times more powerful, but conceptually identical to what Moreton achieved with a 2 pounds microphone and the 75-watt output of a T1154 transmitter. The Merlin's roar had become the digital shriek of 21st-century warfare. Today, Hut 7 is gone, replaced by a manicured lawn at Malvern College, the air carrying only the scent of cut grass where the smell of hot solder once hung. But the physical evidence survives in quiet, climate-controlled halls. At the RAF Museum in Hendon, London, a restored Avro Lancaster R5868S for sugar sits in silent tribute. On May 15, 1985, its exhibit was updated by the museum's curator, Dr. Michael Fopp. Next to the wireless operator station, a new placard was installed, detailing the function of the special switch. And in a small, well-lit display case nearby rests an original Type 48 carbon microphone, the same model Moreton used. It sits next to a T1154 transmitter, its bakelite knobs gleaming under the soft museum lights, a tangible link to the over 500 wireless operators who wielded this secret weapon, their names now recorded in the museum's digital archive. In the end, it all comes down to that one simple object, a small, black, carbon granule microphone, no bigger than a man's thumb. It wasn't a bomb sight or a radar set. It was a piece of technology so common, so utterly unremarkable, that the enemy captured it, held it in their hands, and saw nothing. But in that small device, Sergeant Roger Moreton found a universe of chaos. He found a sound louder than fear, a symphony of noise that saved thousands, a secret that slept for a generation and, once woken, forever changed the story of the war in the night skies.